Thank you once again for joining me, Peter Canego, on yet another nostalgic ship romp. Just a quick mention that 4 of my hour-length videos, including my latest, Torn Castle, about the RMS Windsor Castle at Alang, are available for downloading and streaming at midshipcentury.com/video. And now, on with the show. At dawn on October 3, 1994, we could see through the windows of cabin P-52 that our approach to Piraeus had begun. Within moments, we were on deck with cameras ready. Piraeus arrivals are guaranteed to be full of ship-oriented surprises. Factoring in the date and that we were aboard the ACHILLE LAURO, the ship enthusiast potential was, well, off the chart. Ahead of us was Paquet Cruises' 1957-built Mermaids, and behind us, the Love Boat, Princess Cruises' 1971-built Pacific Princess. Les Mermaids would be just one of many beauties with a French pedigree that we would see that day, and 2 of them were wrecks. Just off Atalante Islet lay the remains of the Pallas Athena and the Melody. Epiratiki Line's Pallas Athena was the former Flandre of 1952. She was gutted by fire earlier that year and awaited a tow to the Turkish scrapyards. The Melody was the former Jebel Dira of 1948. She caught fire and was beached in 1990. In the outer reaches of the harbor at Kanelos, we spotted the former Soviet liner Armenia. And off our port side in Karatsini, the wreck of the Ocean Princess, the 1967-built Italia, lay in a long lineup of ferries and merchant ships. The 1963-built Armenia had been gutted with plans for rebuilding into a modern cruise ship called the Odessa Star. Instead, she sailed off to Turkey and was scrapped shortly after this footage was shot. Golden Sun Cruises' 1968-built Arcadia was also in the queue of arrivals that day. Epiratiki Line's Odysseus was originally the Brazilian coastal liner Princesa Isabel. Built in 1961, she spent many years in Asian waters as Dominion Far East Line's Marco Polo. Although vastly modernized by Epiratiki, she was externally a classic beauty. After her career with Epiratiki and later Royal Olympic, she became the casino ship Lucky Star and was scrapped at Alang in 2008. Epiratiki's MV Olympic, not to be confused with the SS Olympic that would join the fleet the following year, was originally the Spanish ferry Juan March of 1966. She was completely rebuilt into the cruise ship Ocean Majesty in 1994 and chartered to Epiratiki to replace the burnt-out Pallas Athena. The following year, she would be given the name Homeric and then Ocean Majesty once more. Owned by Majestic International Cruises, she still exists and will hopefully continue sailing under charter for British-based Page & Moy and Germany's Hansa Touristik. As we neared our berth, Epiratiki's beautiful little Neptune beckoned from the main Piraeus cruise terminal. Much more about her to come. Anik Line's Rethymnon was one of many Greek ferries with a Japanese pedigree. She was built in 1971 as the rather uninspired Central No. 5. Clusters of ferries, old and new, dominated the waterfront of central Piraeus. Having grown up in Los Angeles, I used to take the Pacific Princess for granted, but now there was no denying just how lovely she and her near twin, the 1972-built Island Princess, actually were. Both ships at this time had a few more years left with Princess, although they were rapidly being outclassed by larger and more modern fleetmates. Bathed in the morning light, Pacific Princess showed off her sleek Scandinavian lines as she pivoted and backed into the berth next to us. Meanwhile, ACHILLE LAURO had just been secured stern to stern with the Neptune. Across the channel from us in Drapetsona, the striking Panagia also soaked up the morning sun. Built in 1961 as the Kronprinz Harald, her sleek lines were an inspiration for a generation of ferries and cruise ships to come. Panagia would spend the next 11 years deteriorating before finally being scrapped in Turkey in 2005. Venturas Line's Cathodia was one of the smaller local ferries that provided transport to the Cyclades and Peloponnesos. Two of my favorites were berthed on the other side of the cruise terminal. Sunline's Stella Okeanis was built in 1965 as the ferry Aphrodite. She and the Stella Solaris, the former French Cambodge of 1953, were rebuilt with stunning interiors by Italian architect Nino Zancada. Both Stellas were in excellent company with Le Mermaids berthed across the way. The first of our hurried ship visits that morning would be the Olympic. Fresh from her rebuild, the 12,000-ton ship could accommodate 548 passengers. Olympic had 8 guest decks. The pool was located on aft Lido Deck. Both Lido and Sun Deck just above had open sunning space. On Sun Deck, there was also an unusual walk-through funnel. The skylight-topped Nefeli nightclub was located on forward Sun Deck, and the Daphne Verandah buffet eatery was on midship's Lido Deck. In addition to a small casino, the next level Hera deck was home to the Sirenes Lounge and Bar and the aft-situated Nine Muses show lounge. The Olympic's interiors had the warm colors and reflective surfaces typical of the AMK or Katsarakis design firm of the early 1990s. The Olympic's Horizon dining room was located just off the main entrance on Dionysos Deck, and the disco was at the bottom of the ship on Poseidon Deck. The Olympic had 7 categories of staterooms, from balconied suites to cozy interiors. This is an outside twin with a porthole, and this is a twin with a picture window. Our next visit was a little jewel of a ship, Epiretiki's Neptune, formerly the 1955-built Bergen liner Meteor. At the main entrance on Dionysos Deck, our host obtained the key for the only open cabin. We climbed the still original staircase 3 levels to Suite HS on Hera Deck. Heading aft, we next visited the Hera Deck pool in Lido. At a mere 2,402 gross tons, and with a capacity of 180 guests, everything on this ship was just a few steps away. The Mermaids Pool Bar was, as one would expect, adjacent to the pool. Open promenades on either side of Hera Deck led to accommodations and an observation platform. After a quick visit to the bridge, we headed down 1 level to Apollo Deck, which was mostly dedicated to public rooms. The lounge of the Tritons, located on forward Apollo Deck, was the ship's main showroom. The handsome Poseidon Bar followed on the port side. And the reading and card room was directly aft and led to the Sirenes dining room. Like most Epiratiki ships, the Neptune was a showcase for interior designer Erminio Lozzi, whose mosaics, metal artworks, and tapestries usually revolved around Greek mythological themes. Lozzi was also an animator and known for inventing the Flintstones' Dino the Dinosaur. The Sirenes dining room featured several Lozzi panels. Although modernized in 1972, its central ceiling recess was still of the Bergen Line era. Moments after disembarking, we watched from the stern of ACHILLE LAURO as Neptune sailed off. Despite some funky additions to her funnel and a tacked-on raked bow, she looked magnificent in Epiretiki's tan livery. Neptune would only sail for a short while longer before being laid up and finally scrapped at Aliyah in 2002. As Bergen Line's Meteor, she can be enjoyed in her full glory during the opening sequences of Alfred Hitchcock's 1966 movie Torn Curtain, starring Paul Newman and Julie Andrews. In 1971, when nearing Vancouver, Meteor suffered a devastating fire caused by a cigarette that claimed 32 crew members. The ship was declared a total loss, but then was purchased by Epiratiki and rebuilt to enjoy another 25 years or so of successful cruising. Peak season Mondays in Piraeus were and still are basically non-stop arrivals and departures. Just as Neptune passed, Olympic was also making her way out of the harbor with a little tug assistance, and Odysseus would soon follow. The good people at Epiratiki and later Royal Olympic were always generous with providing access to their balcony overlooking the port, even after all of their ships had sailed. From Pacific Princess to ACHILLE LAURO and Mermaids, and not to forget a pair of sparkling STELLAs, it was quite a view. In any normal port, this would have been a perfect day of ship watching. But the adventure had only just begun. So grab a bottle of water, some peanuts, and a protein bar as we hail a cab for the rest of the afternoon. Our first stop would be Parma, a massive industrial town just north of Piraeus, lined with shipyards. You never know what you'll find in Parma. Our first encounter was the 1956-built FIESTA Marina, Carnival's former Carnival, which was just beginning her transformation to next year's Olympic for a Piratiki. Nearby was the former Chandris Line's day cruiser Radiosa, which was being scrapped. And lingering off in the distance, the never-to-be-completed cruise ship Sea Venture. We were doing well with time, so we backtracked to Carazzini, where numerous ferries, ro-ros, container ships, tankers, and even the occasional cruise ship were lined up in a long, long row. Unfortunately, I've long since forgotten his name, but our cab driver was very accommodating, driving past this fascinating lineup as smoothly as possible. While we would have loved to stop and document every ship, there were two in particular that caught my eye. Before heading on to our next stop, we backtracked to get photos of the Sea Prince, which was built in 1967 as the Italia. During her last incarnation as Ocean Princess, she grounded in the Amazon and was declared a total loss. Of course, she would be rebuilt by the resourceful Greeks and sail on until 2010, ending her career as Lewis Cruise Line's Sapphire. She was scrapped at Alang in 2012. Just 2 ships away from the Sea Prince, Arcadia Line's Silver Paloma was a rare 2-funneled ferry that began her career in 1959 as the Sassnitz. Her funnel extensions always reminded me of the ACHILLE LAURO. She would spend the next 5 or so years laid up before being scrapped at Aliyah. Our next stop, Elefsina, or Eleusis, was the holy grail for ship lovers. This sheltered bay north of Parma was for several decades the last resting place for numerous liners and cruise ships. In Greek mythology, Elefsina was the gateway to the underworld. With a nearby naval base, photography was only granted with a permit from the port police. Getting that permit was always a challenge, as was the fee for hiring a willing boatman. After lining the boatman's pockets with lots of hard-earned drachma, we were off. This would be my second visit to Elefsina, and my prime mission was to secure footage of the Latsis ships in nearby Petrola. Named for one of Greek billionaire John S. Latsis' daughters, the Mariana 6 was built in 1951 as Elder Dempster Line's Oriole. After a 23-year career of voyages from Liverpool and later Southampton to Lagos, she was sold to John S. Latsis for use as a Saudi accommodation ship in Jeddah and later Rabigh. Mariana 6 was laid up at Petrola in 1989 and basically left to deteriorate until finally being sold for scrap in 2001. Her yacht-like lines were nothing short of perfection. Of course, I had reached out to Latsis for permission to visit Mariana 6 and the next two liners. The request was met with a quick and final, "Do not come." Named for Latsis' other daughter, the majestic 1960-built Margarita L was the former Union Castle Line flagship, the RMS Windsor Castle. The Windsor Castle had a unique pedigree in being launched by Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and at 37,640 gross tons, she was the largest ship built for Union Castle Line's Southampton to Durban service. In 1977, she was sold to Latsis and used as a Saudi accommodation ship until being laid up in 1991. Sandwiched between Margarita L and a tanker, the Mariana 9 was built in 1961 as the Portuguese liner Príncipe Perfeito. Mariana 9 would also spend much of her time in the Middle East as an accommodation ship. She languished in layup until being scrapped in 2001. The boatman was getting orders to leave as I shot this last expensively obtained footage. For the full story of Margarita L and the RMS Windsor Castle, please stream Torn Castle or check out the DVD on midshipcentury.com/video. I had just enough time and drachma to persuade the boatman to head to another fascinating raft of cruise ships. En route, after parting glances of Mariana 6, we encountered the massive Latsis tanker Rabigh Bay 3. The 1977-built ship was large enough to swallow both Marianas and the Margarita L, with room to spare. This next cluster, or raft, contained one of the most unlucky cruise ships ever. Frankly, if ships could be deemed suicidal, Piratiki Line's Pegasus would top the list. Built in 1975 as the Silja Line ferry Svea Corona, the 12,573 gross ton ferry was sold to Sundance Cruises in 1984 and rebuilt into the cruise ship Sundancer. On her third cruise, she hit a submerged rock in Alaskan waters and partially sank. Next to her was the laid-up 1953-built cruise ship Orion. And next to Orion was the 1956-built city of MYKONOS. Laid up in 1991, the city of MYKONOS would capsize and sink at these very moorings in late 1996. We circled around the Arcadia Line's ferry, Ioannis Express, to the other side of the raft. Frustratingly, I neglected to point the camera at the 1955-built city of Hydra, which was between Ioannis Express and city of MYKONOS. Like her bigger sister, she sank at her moorings in 2000. Although rebuilt by her last owners, Cycladic Cruises, the city of MYKONOS was still recognizable as the former Adriatica liner San Marco. The Orion went on to a strange rebuilding into the failed Olympia 1. With the chapel on her bow and a helipad on her stern, the ship was scrapped at Aliyah in the early 2000s. And now back to the Pegasus. After her partial sinking in 1984, the Sundancer was declared a total loss. She was then sold to a Piratiki who rebuilt her into the Pegasus. In June of 1991, she caught fire and partially sank at Venice and was once again declared a total loss. Piratiki sold the ship to Strinsis Lines in late 1994. While being rebuilt into the Ionian Express, she caught fire again and was towed to Aliyah for scrapping in 1995. And so ended the life of a very star-crossed ship. Elefsina has many similar stories. As our boatman headed us back to the marina, we spotted another ill-fated ship in the distance. We even had a few minutes to get some pre-social media selfies in this gateway to the underworld of ships. Thoroughly elated and a few pounds lighter from all the drachma spent, we bid the boatman farewell, hopped into our waiting cab, and headed off to Piraeus Central for the rest of the day's adventure. We were definitely having a lucky day. It wasn't easy back then to find a non-smoking cab in Piraeus, let alone a nice driver who patiently helped us with our crazy photo requests. Back in Piraeus Central, dozens of ferries were lined up, and a handful of cruise ships were still lingering. In the main hub, Les Mermaids and the soon-to-depart STELLAs were still tied up. We had a date with a new arrival who had just berthed where Olympic was that morning. Intercruise's 12,000-ton La Palma was yet another former French liner sailing under the Greek flag. Built in 1952 for Messageries Maritimes Marseille to East African service, her original name was Ferdinand de Lesseps. Rebuilt for cruising, she was a budget ship that was both funky and full of character. The 1964-built VERGINA, the former ferry Bilu, was berthed directly behind La Palma. La Palma is the kind of cruise ship I miss the most. Low-key, intimate, informal, and fun. She would sail for another couple years before being laid up. Although eventually bought by Lewis Cruise Lines, her only voyage was to Alang for scrapping under the name Sagar in 2003. La Palma had wide-open foredecks that were great for arrivals and departures. She also had a nude sunbathing area just aft of her funnel and a beer garden that was especially popular with German guests. Not including the nudist area, she had 7 passenger decks with a pool and sunning area on aft Promenade Deck. Promenade Deck began with an open observation terrace that was followed by the Piccadilly Lounge. Beautiful glass-enclosed promenades continued aft on either side. The Delphi Lounge was located on aft promenade deck, not far from the pool in Lido. The La Palma's largest public room, the Olympus Lounge, was located one level down on forward Apollo deck. And the Dionysos Restaurant was in the heart of the ship on forward Hermes deck. La Palma had 10 stateroom categories, from spacious suites to intimate interiors. This is a Category C outside triple. How lucky we were to have all these beautiful ships at our disposal. From La Palma, it was a short walk past Pacific Princess to our Grand Blue Lady, the ACHILLE LAURO. Back on board, we would wash off a full day's worth of old ship and salt spray, have dinner, then head back up to deck to watch Pacific Princess sail off into the night. We would soon follow.